Aikwe, Neknamalita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian, and today I will be doing the rainy day book tag. So I'm not sure about y'all, but here locally we are going through our second winter. Please stay safe, stay warm. I know that a lot of other places are having it worse than we are. The fact that we've had several days of snow and hard freeze is really weird for my local location. It makes sense for an hour outside east of here, but here locally it's just weird. So I hope everyone is being safe and warm. I personally am in my cozy soft shirt, as well as partaking in some chicken and dumpling soup that I just reheated. We had some last night and figured that I haven't done a book tag in a while, and this one seems very appropriate for this time of this weather we're having right now. So this book tag, the rainy day book tag, was created by that Bookie and was posted on YouTube about 6 years ago. So this is an oldie. But yeah, let's get right on into it. The first prompt is rain. Pick a book that makes you cry every time you read it. I am not the biggest rereader at all. But a book that anytime someone asks for recommendations for books that'll make them cry, my first go-to is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. Now I know that not a whole lot of people enjoy the movie covers on book covers. I actually happen to really enjoy this book in particular, A Monster Calls. I actually watched the movie before reading the book. That's just how I like to do things anyway, but I watched the movie and then like a week later started reading the book, and even though I knew what was going to happen, I was still sobbing as I was reading this book. So we are following, this is like a middle grade, we are following Connor, who ends up meeting a monster, and the monster comes calling for Connor and wants the most dangerous thing of all, the truth. This monster ends up telling Connor stories, and Connor has to realize that there is no one's necessarily like 100% a hero all the time, and there's just the same as no one's 100% a villain, that people are complicated. There are gray morals everywhere, and Connor is dealing with a lot of heavy stuff right now. His mom's currently in the hospital. He is living with his grandmother, and his dad is visiting him from America. He's going through a lot, and so I highly recommend it. The book is just as good as the movie. I particularly just love the visual elements that the movie brought, and of course Liam Neeson's voice is spectacular. So prompt 2 is Puddle. Pick a book where the world is underwater or mostly around water. So I actually have a prompt for this in my Pokemon cards. Choose my monthly TBR. But the one that came to mind immediately is actually one that I have reread. It's like one of the few books that I have reread and immediately thought of, and that is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, aka Seanan McGuire. This is a book following Victoria Stewart. She's a marine biologist that focuses on sounds and how they travel in the water, I believe, or like identifying sounds. And she is preparing to get on a boat. This boat is the second boat that's going to be going to the Mariana Trench. Both boats are owned by an entertainment company. The first time they sent a boat out, it was to make a mockumentary. However, something ended up going wrong. The boat was found with no one on board. There was leaked footage of mermaids getting on board and killing people. This has come to speculation that because they're an entertainment company, that this was faked, that there's no way. Victoria Stewart wants to know the truth behind it because her sister was on that first boat. So on the second voyage, it's actually a research vessel. They have scientists on board. They also have as well as a bunch of other folks. Sometimes scientists are not really there to debunk, to see if mermaids are real or not. They are going for their own gain, for their own research purposes. But others have their life stakes on this research. Particularly, one woman in particular has spent her whole career focusing on mermaids from a scientific viewpoint. I absolutely love this book. When the first time I read it, I only gave it 4 stars because I thought their climax was anticlimactic. However, upon reread in 2022, I actually read the prequel to this book, Rolling in the Deep? And then reread this one and appreciated the amount of detail and that Mira Grant put into this book. So Mira Grant is Shauna Maguire. She writes under Mira Grant when she does horror. So yeah, I had bumped this up to 5 stars after that reread. Okay, prompt 3 is Rain Boots. Pick a book with a character with a damned soul. So from my understanding, vampires are supposed to have damned souls, right? I don't know if this is a stretch or not, but I ended up picking Dead Collections by Isaac Fellman. Now, I originally picked this up because it had an interesting premise in terms of we're following an archivist named Soul. They are a trans man. Ends up meeting Elsie, the larger-than-life widow of a moderately famous television writer who's come to donate her wife's papers. There's an instant spark, but Soul has a secret. He suffers from an illness called vampirism and hides from the sun by living in his basement office. On their way to following in love, the two traverse grief, delve into the internet fandom they once unknowingly shared, and navigate the realities of anti-trans discrimination and stigmas of carrying the vampire disease. Now, what I enjoyed about this was that it was kind of just slice of life. Vampirism as a disease in this is more of a life. It's one of those things that have been introduced to be a lifesaver. And it's not so much of Soul being a trans man. It's more of him navigating and helping Elsie navigate grief, as well as his life as he deals with vampirism. So, and being an archivist, and as well as something strange starts happening in his archive. Yeah, I thought it was really fun and comforting. Prompt 4 is Umbrella. Pick a book that was big and comforting. I am not the biggest fan of tomes. I'm just ultimately intimidated by them. So this book that I'm picking isn't necessarily a big book by any means. It's just more comforting than a lot of the big books that I have read, and that is With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. This comes in at just under 400 pages, and Elizabeth Acevedo is a slam poet whose writing is exquisite. I think I've read almost everything by her at this point, but this one in particular I really just loved. I believe this was the second book that I read from her, and we were following Imani Santiago. Ever since she got pregnant freshman year, Imani Santiago's life has been about making the tough decisions, doing what has to be done for her daughter and her abuela. The one place she can let all that go is in the kitchen. There she lets her hands tell her what to cook, listening to her intuition and adding a little something magical every time, turning her food into a straight up goodness. Even though she's always dreamed of working in a kitchen after she graduates, Imani knows that it's not worth her time to pursue the impossible. Yet despite the rules she's made for her life and everyone else's rules which she refuses to play by, once Imani starts cooking, her only choice is to let her talent break free. I particularly really enjoy books that have great descriptions of food. This is no different. I absolutely love that. I think that's just a comforting thing, really. But what I also really enjoyed about this was that this was a YA that didn't have any cringy elements to it. And what I mean by that is that I kept expecting Imani to get into more trouble, and had this element, so Imani, because she's such a young mother, everyone is questioning her decisions, right, of what she wants to do. And I questioned it too. I had that perspective as well, going into this, thinking that she was going to make the wrong choice and get into more trouble. But that never happened in here, and that's what I loved about it. And that's like, it made kind of like hit me in the face of just like, why you did what other folks in here were doing to Imani. And what I loved about this book as well was that it was basically Imani growing into herself and having that confidence to be able to make her choices, because they weren't bad choices. Because she's in a school district that's not that great, but it's what she and her abuela can afford. She does ultimately want to cook, and like doesn't see any way around it, but when an opportunity comes up, she hesitates, but ultimately makes the decision to take that opportunity. And basically it's her finding herself and finding her confidence, and that's what I absolutely loved about this. So prompt 5 is rainy day movie. Pick a book that was turned into a movie that you love to watch on rainy days. I have 2 for this. The first one, I don't know where my physical copy is. I'm sure it's on another bookshelf somewhere, but I'm not going to go find it right now. But I will post it here, and that is Howl's Moving Castle by Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So this is actually a Studio Ghibli movie. It's one of the first ones I was introduced to. I think I was introduced to Princess Mononoke a little too young. I didn't quite get it. I want to rewatch it. I haven't yet. But Howl's Moving Castle was one of the first ones that I truly really enjoyed from Studio Ghibli. I absolutely fell in love with it. I love the atmosphere and love the I just loved it. I thought it was so magical and fun. So much like the movie, the book, we are following Sophie, who has the great misfortune of being the eldest of 3 daughters, destined to fail miserably should she ever leave home to seek her fate. But when she unwittingly attracts the ire of the Witch of the Waste, Sophie finds herself under a horrid spell that transforms her into an old lady. Her only chance at breaking it lies in the ever-moving castle in the hills, the Wizard Howl's castle. To untangle the enchantment, Sophie must handle the heartless Howl, strike a bargain with a fire demon, and meet the Witch of the Waste head-on. So there's obviously some elements that end up changing when it comes to... Oh shit, my battery light is blinking at me. There's obviously some elements that change when it is when there comes to an adaptation, but what I loved about both of these as a book and as a movie was that I think they really helped combine elements. So I watched the movie for years. It's one that I love to put on rainy days when I just need to relax, or if I feel that my anxiety is just kind of getting out of control. The book, when I'm reading it, there were elements that answered some questions about the movie. There's some details in the movie that kind of went, well, where'd that come from and what do you mean? Particularly if you've ever seen it, there was at one point we do meet one of Sophie's sisters. In the book there says there's 3, like she's one of 3. And at one point in the movie someone says that she's looking for her sister. And it's kind of, it doesn't go anywhere from there. The book answers that. The book delves more into her sisters. And there was part of the book that I had a hard time just kind of visualizing, and the movie definitely helped with that. So that is definitely a for sure rainy day movie that I love to watch. The other is The Little Prince. This book is by Anton de Saint-Exupéry, but Netflix ended up having a movie adaptation of The Little Prince that I absolutely love. The book, not so much. I keep rereading it thinking that there's something I'm missing and that one day I'll reread it and absolutely love it like everyone else seems to. That hasn't really happened yet.
That doesn't matter.
Okay, my battery did die, so if it's changed slightly, my apologies, as well as for the dog. So yeah, this book I have yet to really enjoy. We are following basically, okay, this is a children's book that was translated from French into English. And we are kind of getting the story of this boy, the little prince, who is on this planet with his rose, and he ends up leaving his planet in search of something. He ends up going to these other planets and feels that like adults have strange importances. He ends up meeting these strange characters, and then he finally comes to Earth, where he befriends a fox, as well as this pilot who ends up getting crash landing in the Sahara Desert. And this pilot is ultimately the one that's telling the Little Prince's story, and what he ends up learning from the Little Prince. I can't say that I particularly like the book. I swear every time, this is one that like I said, I've reread multiple times, and each time I keep thinking that something's gonna connect for me, and it hasn't yet. I particularly really enjoyed the movie that Netflix did, mostly because it is just, I think it explains it a little better. We are actually following a little girl in this one who has a very rigid schedule with her mother. There's a plan and they are sticking to that plan.
Minute of the hour of the day of the week of the month of the year of your life.
She has to spend so much time studying, so much time exercising to be able to meet this goal. And the little girl ends up meeting her eccentric next door neighbor who kind of just like befuddles the whole schedule. And she ends up spending some time with him. He's an elderly man who actually met the Little Prince. He's the pilot, and tells the story of the Little Prince to this little girl. I believe the older gentleman is played by, what's his name? Jeff Bridges.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So yeah, Jeff Bridges plays the aviator, who actually is like the pilot in the book, and then Rachel McAdams plays the mother. These are two actors that I particularly really enjoy. Like a Netflix special in 2015, and I remember like watching it several times in a row because I just really enjoyed it. So I particularly just really enjoyed the animation style of it. So yeah, there's that. Okay, yeah, prompt 6 is coffee. Pick a book that you couldn't get enough of, the hot and steamy romance. For this, I'm gonna pick a book that I recently gave 5 stars. I'm not the biggest romance reader because there's so many things that I particularly want from a romance, but this one really just hit in the right way for me. But that is A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This was so cute. I ended up listening to this via Libby through my library, and the narrator is so good.
What the? How long has that been there?
Let me see who that is real quick, because so good. Like, I was super impressed by this. So we are following Mika, who is a witch. She's actually Indian and lives in Britain, but in this world, witches aren't supposed, like, the rules are that witches aren't supposed to gather for any large numbers in any length of time, because otherwise then humans notice the magic happening, and they don't want humans to know that witches still exist. So Mika, to hide that she's a witch, pretends she's a witch on YouTube. This gets noticed by a group of people who then want to hire Mika to tutor 3 young witches that they have in their care. Mika is intrigued. She goes and meets these 3 witches. They're all adopted, and their caretakers are a housekeeper, a gardener, his eccentric husband, and a librarian, and a grumpy librarian. And Mika just kind of, it's this found family-esque element, and of course there's like some romance involved with the grumpy librarian. Mika is this happy sunshine. That's the trope, essentially, is this happy sunshine meets this grumpy librarian, and they end up falling for each other. I particularly really enjoyed it, mostly because so what ends up throwing me for a lot of, I was doing something. Samara McLaren is the narrator for this book, and she does such a good job because we get, there's 3 young girls, right? And for some reason, like, when I went in, I was like, I don't know. They're probably gonna all sound, I'm not probably gonna have a hard time telling them apart. And no, Samara does such a good job in differentiating each and every character. I absolutely loved it. All their personalities of these characters shined through with Samara's voices. I absolutely loved it. But yeah, it was ultimately really sweet. It was magical. I loved that magical element to it. I think the one thing that I don't like about this book is the cover. I love the color theme. I don't particularly like this style. I probably even would have been fine with just without the people, really. Yeah, but otherwise, absolutely love this book. I wouldn't say there was very many steamy scenes. It was this very slow burn-esque type of romance, but you could tell that they were, I don't know, it was just nice. And I can't say that it was necessarily steamy. I think it was fade to black. There was but I don't know, I just absolutely love this book. So okay, prompt 7 is Poncho. Pick a book with a main character who has an amazing best friend. For that, I would have to pick Elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger. In this book, we are following Elatsoe, or Ellie, who can see ghosts and who can summon ghosts. That is part of her lineage. She is Apache, Lipan Apache. She is also Ace. This is a world very similar to our own, except that the mythological creatures of people's cultures are alive, essentially. There are vampires, there are werewolves, and they all have an effect on these people in this world. Ellie's cousin ends up being murdered, and she is determined to find out who his killer is, particularly after his ghost comes to her in a dream and says, "Protect my family." Ellie ends up going to his location in Texas and finds a small town that is very secretive and very mysterious. Ellie has 2 best friends. One is her dog, who is a ghost, and as well as, I forget who her best friend's name is, but I just really appreciate it because he's of the opposite gender, but there's nothing there romantically. It's a platonic relationship, and he's perfectly fine with that, as well as his family is as well. He is a descendant of an elf lord, I believe, and there's like people traveling through fairy rings. I don't know, I ultimately love this book. This was ultimately one of my favorite books of 2021 or 2020. Ultimately one of my favorites of all time. I particularly really enjoyed all the relationships that were in this book, because a lot of young adult books, I found that there's this lack of parental relationship with the main character, or lack of parents in general. And this one, the parents were very supportive of Ellie's decisions and helped her. And the fact that Ellie has a platonic relationship with this boy is really nice, and it's just also everyone's there for her, and there's a good back and forth, like not so to the point where it's like, oh yeah, she's getting herself in dangerous situations, or her parents are like, yeah, that's fine. No, they are obviously concerned for her. So yeah, that's one thing. The relationships in here are like awesome. Okay, prompt 8 is Gutters. Pick a book where the world is dirty and grimy in the way that you would imagine it. For that, I would say, it really says something. For that, I would say American War by Omar El-Akkad. I haven't read this in so long. So this one is, I want to say post-apocalyptic, but it's more than that. It's something that could plausibly happen. It's been a while since I've read it, so let me just go ahead and read you the synopsis. Sarette Chestnut, born in Louisiana, is only 6 when the war breaks out in 2074. But even when she knows that oil is outlawed, her home state is half underwater, and the unmanned drones that fill the sky are not there to protect her. A stubborn, undaunted, and thick-skinned tomboy, she is soon pulled into the heart of secessionist country when the war reaches Louisiana and her family is forced into Camp Patience, a sprawling tent city for refugees. There she is befriended by a mysterious man who opens her eyes to the injustices around her, and under whose tutelage she is transformed into a deadly instrument of revenge. Narrated by the one person privy to Sarette's secret life, American War is a hauntingly told story of immeasurable ruin of war in a nation, a community, a family, and individual. It's a novel that considers what might happen if the United States were to turn its most devastating policies and weapons upon itself. Yeah, this was ultimately a book that my partner and I both read and absolutely loved. Like, we couldn't stopped talking about it when we first read it together. Like I think I read it and then he read it and then we just kept going back and forth like that. I haven't reread it since because ultimately it was something that it scared me because it still seems very plausible with the way some policies are going. I felt like this was a world that was dirty and grimy. Prompt 9 is cuddly pet. Pick a book that had out of this world or very enjoyable animals in it. There is a book that has a sweet couple of animal companions, and that is Legends and Lattes. There is a huge cat in this. I forget what they named the cat, but it's like a huge cat. Like it's a domesticated, I want to call it mega cat, but that's not what it is. That ends up coming to live in this cafe, or at least like kind of patrol the cafe. But there is also a rat humanoid creature that bakes baked goods. I mean, our main characters and work, and there's a succubus as her companion. Yeah, and this is overall just like an enjoyable book, so yeah. Okay, and then finally the last prompt is sweet treat. Pick a book that have the sweetest ending. Most of these could be considered so, but to keep with the not picking a book that I've already picked, I would say I enjoyed the ending for When Women Were Dragons. I don't necessarily know if that would count as an animal companion either. So basically this is a book where this is kind of like an alternate history book where women at some point ended up turning into dragons. So like it was kind of like, it reads like a history book of sorts, or a report of sorts, because we were following Alex Green, who when she is young in 1955, her aunt ends up turning into a dragon along with a bunch of other women, what is known as the Great Dragoning. And she has a bunch of questions, but rather than being given answers, she's told to be quiet. That's not what they talk about. It's not polite to ask questions like that, to keep her head down and just keep moving on with life. It's being treated like you don't talk about it and you just forget about it. But she hasn't forgotten about it and she has questions. And it's actually really frustrating to her because she knows that she had an aunt, but her mom's acting like, no, she never had an aunt. But it's like, okay, but my cousin's now living with us. And it's like, no, that's your sister. So it's a very, very frustrating, and we end up finding out that the reasons of why women are turning into dragons. And ultimately it is Alex finding herself and finding her voice and finding like why finding certain things. Yes. Okay. But yeah, she ends up finding herself. There's definitely problems with this book. It was one of my favorite for 2022, but will have to say there are problems with this book. It was very, folks have said that this is like a feminist work, but it is very white feminist. Yeah, just keep that in mind. But I think the ending to this was just very satisfying and it was sweet. And I can't get into it without actually like spoiling the book for you, but it is one that I really enjoyed, despite its problems. So, all right, and that is the rainy day book tag. I will have a link down to the original video down in the description down below if you want to go check it out. Otherwise, let me know what your favorite cozy read is down in the comments down below. And if you've made it this far, let's put an umbrella emoji. Be sure to like this video if you have yet to do so already. Subscribe if you haven't. And I will see you in another video very soon. Chew.